I'm gonna be doing some beater work today, working on the beater, the 02 Civic Daily. Car's got 307,000 miles on it. Started noticing a little bit of noise in the front end. Everything's still relatively tight, but the control arm bushings there's some play in there, up and down play. So instead of just replacing the control arms, car's got a lot of miles. We're already in here, so gonna go ahead and do ball joints and inner and outer tie rods. Also gonna be doing struts. It's really just the driver's side. Car's got a lot of miles on it, so I'm gonna do both sides. I'm going ahead and pretty much rebuild the whole front end. That way we don't have to worry about it. After everything's said and done, we'll be doing an alignment on it. So if possible, I'm gonna record that process as well and explain all that to you. So let's go ahead and get right to it. First thing I'm gonna do is just jack the car up, get it on jack stands, get the wheels off. Okay, got the wheels off. Gonna go ahead and show you a quick, just a idea of the setup on these cars. So obviously got a strut, no upper control arm. One thing I don't like about these cars and the RSXs, CRVs in these particular years is how the rack is mounted up so high. It makes it kind of a pain to do an alignment or service the inner tie rods. But just because they're up high, so much higher than usually they're down here. But so pretty much you got probably like 3 bolts holding the top hat to the frame of the car, 2 bolts holding the strut to the spindle. You've got one, let's see if we can see it here. Yep, little ball joint holding the spindle to the control arm, sway bar end link, and 2 bolts holding the control arm to the car. Now this is where our play is right here. Let me get a pry bar and I'll show you. See how that play? That bushing is completely separated. That's where our noise is when we go in and out of the driveway. Other than that, man, the rest of the suspension is actually pretty tight, which is surprising for 300,000 miles, but it's not surprising because it's a Honda. What we're gonna do is, since how much you're taking the car apart depends on what all you're replacing. I'm pretty much replacing everything. So first thing I'm gonna do is pull the brakes, and I'll just hang them up out the way somewhere. And then we'll just go ahead, we'll rip this whole suspension out, and we'll go from there on it. Before I pull the caliper, I'm gonna go ahead and I just wet the pry bar in here and pry against the rotor. That's gonna slide the caliper out, and that's gonna compress the piston in at the same time. So you can already see how loose our brakes are. So once I pull this out, I'll have no trouble putting this back together. So I'm just gonna pull the bracket and caliper as an assembly. 2 bolts. Gotta pull the bracket that holds the brake line to the strut. Then we'll get this completely out of the way. Go ahead and unbolt this brake hose bracket first. Pull our brake. Okay, so unbolted. I like to take these caliper hanger, hang it up out the way. Gotta find somewhere to hang it. Got it hung up out of the way right here. Just want to make sure you got it suspended. You want to take the all the weight off the hose. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, go ahead and pull this rotor. Your Hondas usually come with the screw that holds these on. They're usually a pain. A lot of times they strip. So once I take them off, I usually don't put them back, because once you bolt the wheel up, everything holds it in place anyway. It's really not needed. So now that the brakes are out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and disconnect our outer tie rod to get that removed. Also, you have to take our cotter pin out. I'll knock this loose. I usually wouldn't do it like this, but you know, if I'm gonna be reusing it, but obviously this is getting replaced, so I really don't care if we mess the threads up. 19 millimeters here on both sides. Kind of broke loose. So up top here we just got the 3 bolts holding the strut to the strut tower. Last bolt's out. Just kind of swing this out the way. Pull the whole assembly out as one. And like I said, just be mindful of not letting your CV axle overextend. Alright, so got the strut out. Excuse all the junk in the background, but now we've got the strut out, let's talk about struts for a minute. So if you're going to be replacing the strut, you got 2 options. You can either replace just the strut, which is the shock absorber assembly essentially, and that would mean you would buy the strut, you would have to take your spring off and your top hat and reuse it on the new assembly. Now in order to do that, you will need a spring compressor tool. You can rent them at the parts store, and compress the spring, take the center nut out once you've got all the tension off of this. If you try to take this loose with this tension on here, you could die. So very mindful of that. So something to think about though, if you're just replacing the strut, say this car's got 300,000 miles on it, which it does. If I was just replacing the strut, okay, I got a new strut, but I still got 300,000 mile springs, and sometimes the top hats do wear out, but you know, a blown strut will usually give you that real soft, bouncy ride. And a lot of people just think, okay, well, I'll just replace the struts. But if you got to think about your spring wears too. A spring steel, over time as it compressing, decompressing, that wears on the steel. So if you notice your car with a lot of miles on it, if the ride height is sagged, the car looks like it's lowered, it's usually from the spring wearing out, because springs do wear out. And a lot of times one of the side effects of that is less ground clearance, but if you don't care about that, you don't care about that. But a lot of times when the spring sags, you start to get negative camber, because that's just a byproduct of ride height lowering, is negative camber. So we'll talk more about that when we get into the, I'm going to be doing a video on alignment on this car. We'll talk all about alignment processes and suspension geometry. But another option is, you know, that you can do what some brand is called they got what's called a quick strut, and you can buy it from the parts store to come with a brand new strut, spring, and top hat completely assembled. And that, I don't have a lot of experience with them, but I've seen people use them, and you know that you got all new parts, new springs, new strut. You eliminate all those problems, and you also eliminate the sketchiness, if you've never done it before, of trying to disassemble and reassemble a strut. Okay, so as you can see, we got the strut out now. So the next thing we're going to take loose is we're going to have to pull the spindle, and I'm pulling that out so that I can gain access to the lower ball joint. So I'm just going to completely remove the spindle. Once that's out, I will remove the lower control arm, and that involves these 2 bolts and 1 bolt holding the sway bar end link to the lower control arm. So the first thing I'm going to do is take the spindle off. I do have to take loose the axle nut. It's a 30, like a 32, I don't know, I'll tell you in a minute. For this axle nut, I use an impact for it. Usually that does the job. If you don't have an impact, well, I should have told you before you got to this point, but while you still have the brakes assembled, you can have someone get in the car, hold the brakes down, and you can take a breaker bar and because they're going to be holding the brakes down. It's going to hold this assembly solid. You can take the breaker bar and a pipe or whatever you need to get leverage, and you can bust this loose here. But an impact usually works for me. First thing I got to do is pry this little tab up here. It's kind of like a keeps it from loosening. Oh. Okay, I was right, 32. All right. Just that easy. Came right off. So now, luckily if you've got a car that's not rusted up, this will easily come out. You can take a block of wood and a hammer and tap on this. You really don't want to be beating on these threads. Well, a lot of times you can just take a, you can get a pry bar to the back. A lot of times you can just kind of work it loose like that. Not. I think we got it broke loose. Axle is out. Okay, got that loose. So now, just gotta take our retaining nut out. We're ready to take this spindle out. So let's see what size that is. Yeah, remember when you're reassembling this stuff to torque everything back down to the factory specs. A lot of times you can find the specs online, or you got a service manual or Haynes manual or something like that, you know. Take this lower ball joint loose. I really could do it off the car because I'm taking the whole control arm loose. There you go. Pop goes the weasel. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the sway bar end link loose from the lower control arm. I'm going to take our two lower control arm bolts, one there, one over here, and our control arm will be out, and our suspension will be pretty well disassembled, save for our tie rods. I am going to try to tie this axle up somehow. I'm going to secure this tie rod, this axle up, because I don't want it, that'll work. I don't want it dangling, because if it does, once I take this loose, which is what it was resting on, it'll dangle even further, and I don't want to put the inner joint at too much of an angle, because like I said, it could pop loose. And like I said, it could damage the joint. So that's loose. Separate that from our control arm. Hopefully you can see this here. Gotta take that one loose next. And okay, well, as tight as I thought it was gonna be. Control arm is unbolted, so now we're just going to slide this deal on out of there. There's that pesky bushing. So here are our new lower control arms, and these are ball joints. I just stuck them in there so I didn't lose any of the hardware. So here's our tie rods. I've already just stuck the outers on there to make sure that everything's threaded in like it was supposed to. Okay, so I gotta show you guys this. I'm gonna show it to you here with the new parts because it's just too hard to see under the car. Okay, so this is a lock washer. So this goes on here, and you can see it fits into the, maybe you can see it fits into the groove here. So once it's on, it doesn't turn. Now on the car, what this is used as is a lock washer. So once this is on the car, the ones that's already on the car too, once it's tightened down, it's flat up against the rack. Imagine my finger is the rack. That's a good representation. Probably not. But once it's threaded down, they've actually got the this washer is bent over onto the edge of the rack on both sides. And what that does is that's locking it from, if these want to loosen up, it can't turn because this is actually bent over the edge of the rack. So I had to come up. So the hardest thing is where it is hard to get in there and actually unbend the stock ones. So I'm going to show you the best I can how I've unbent these on the car. Okay, so if you look, you can see the washer and you can see how they're kind of bent over the edge. I've already kind of unbent the one on the passenger side, and I have to beat on it a little bit more. But let me show you how I'm doing that. I'm going in from the lower section of the frame down here, and putting it up against the washer. You might not be able to see it, but I'm putting it up against here and just tapping on it. And that's separating the one on the passenger side. Still going around to the passenger side, do the same thing to separate the one here on the driver's side. But that seems to be working so far. Gotta loosen that top one a little bit more, and that's gonna get our washer out. Okay, so we're about to take this inner tie rod loose. I've already done the other side, so we're on this one. I was going to use my inner tie rod tool. Would not work with this style rack because this has this crazy funky rack going on. Try to use a regular wrench, there's no room to get to it, so I had to get a crow's foot. The correct size is 29 millimeter. I think this was a 1 1/8, which is really close. Fit perfect on my aftermarket one, but the new one was a little tight. But the first thing I had to do, this one was really thick, so I had to grind it down. Well, hopefully you can get it to focus here. But anyway, I had to grind it down some because it was just too thick to go on. So now it works. Also, like I said, it fit perfect on my aftermarket one, but a little tight on my stock ones. So I just had to take just a little bit off the inside here so that it would fit. So we're just gonna, I've already bent the washer out the way, the lock washer. So we're just gonna go slide this up on the tie rod. Then we'll take a couple extensions and our breaker bar ratchet and be able to rotate it. So I've got it on. Now we take our extensions. Also, we've turned the rack to full lock to move this, give us as much room as possible. And usually when you take the inner tie rod loose, you have to take the outer and the jam nut loose to be able to get your inner tie rod tool on, but it really doesn't apply here anymore because the inner tie rod tool will not work for this application. So now we're just gonna rotate it. Be mindful here of not hitting any body panels. There we go. I think I'll make it loose. Okay. Okay. Alright, now it's loose enough where we can twist it out by hand. There you go. So you can see the block. Okay, wait. You can see the block back there that these thread into, and you can see how it's flat on top and bottom, and that's what these washers kind of conform to when you bend them around the tie rod when you put it back. Okay. So now what I'm going to work on is trying to get these ball joints changed out. So what we're using is the snap-on ball joint separator. So two-handed. Okay, so this one comes with instructions. You go in here and find the car you got. It'll tell you which adapters to use. So let's do that real quick. I hadn't used this thing in a really long time, so. But obviously it presses in from the top, so to remove it we have to press it out. from the bottom. You can see it presses in from the top, so we press it out from the bottom. If you watch right here, you'll see it start to slide out. There you go. Back the tool back out. And there's your old ball joint. Okay, so you can see where we cut it. It's just, it was so long that when it went in here, it was hitting the inside of this, whereas this needed to seat and max out there. So I'm gonna come in here and just clean this up a little bit. We'll get ready to put our new one in. Yeah, we're able to get it in there without damaging the boots. I just want to make sure you're putting everything in square, perpendicular, whatever you want to call it. We're going to use the same adapters here, but I'm going to have to extend this one a little bit because how we had to cut it to get it out, that means it's too long, so I had to make the receiving end longer. So that we don't max it out. And just that simple, got your new one in. So I just want to look and make sure that it is completely flush seated around there. Which this one is. Boot still looks good. Now with this aftermarket one, it did come with a snap ring, so it will go in this groove right here. Again, make sure that's seated all the way around. Yep. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Having one of these tools makes it a lot easier, but like I said, you can do it. There's other methods of doing it, hydraulic press or whatever. But yep, that's pretty much it with the ball joints. And we'll be using retaining the factory hardware as well. So very simple. Sometimes you have to kind of play around, get everything, these bushings kind of oriented properly. That one went in really easy. Sometimes you have to take a pry bar so you can get the holes to line up. This is simply just gonna slide back in place and sit down in that tapered hole there. We'll put on our castle nut here on the bottom. Hopefully you can see that. There we go. Take our cotter pin, run it through the hole in the castle nut. Right, to being one up and one through. Only thing left to do is Hook up our outer tie rod to our spindle. Put that on. Our castle nut. Alright, bend mine down like that. Okay, now that we got the strut bolts in, make sure you tighten, torque the bolts to the factory spec. Go ahead and put our sway bar end link on while I'm thinking about it. Take our two caliper bracket bolts. Brought our brake hose to the strut, the bracket here on the struts, the factory hardware. Okay. The only thing we got left to do up here is torque down our axle nut. Make sure you torque this to spec as well. And you want to just kind of put an indent in it here so that it can't back off. So yeah, it's pretty much gonna button it up on the install. So now I'm just gonna go around, double check everything. Also, the only last thing to really do is to grease whatever is applicable on these new parts. On this one, the only thing greasable is these new outer tie rods. So get all that stuff greased up. I'm gonna get the alignment done next couple of days here. If possible, I'm gonna try my best to, if I've got time, and to be able to record the process. So you just be on the lookout for that. And thanks for watching.